Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to speak directly to the women who have drawn a line in the sand and said, I will not settle. You see, the difference between a woman who refuses to settle and one who constantly compromises her calling is not always found in her circumstances. It's in her choices. It's not just what she does in front of people, but what she does when no one is watching. And I want to tell you this, it starts in the morning. That first hour, that first breath of the day, it matters. The women who live with conviction and purpose don't wake up and instantly give their minds to the chaos of the world. They don't check the temperature of social media before checking the temperature of their hearts. They rise with intention, not because it's trendy, not because it makes for a pretty planner layout, but because they know how they begin is how they build. The world teaches us to wake up overwhelmed, to check emails before we've even spoken to God, to run to our to-do list before we've even asked, why am I doing any of this? And yet we wonder why we're exhausted before we even leave the house. We wonder why we feel like imposters in our own lives. It's because we are building days on the foundation of reaction rather than revelation. Let me tell you something, purpose doesn't come from the notifications on your phone. It doesn't come from the calendar someone else filled for you. It comes from knowing who you are in the quiet, from standing before the Lord in humility and saying, I'm not here to make it through another day. I'm here to walk in what you've called me to. And a woman who refuses to settle knows this. She doesn't just want to survive. She wants to be aligned. She wants to walk in truth, to lead with clarity, to live with intention. So she wakes up not perfectly, no, but purposefully. There is a sacred stillness in her morning, and she guards it with her life, not because she's better than anyone else, but because she's tired of building her day on sand when she was meant to stand on solid rock. She knows that the battle is won before she leaves the room. She knows that peace isn't something you stumble into at 3 when you finally answered every email. It's something you anchor yourself to before the world has a chance to tell you who you are. Before the world tells her she's not enough, she reminds herself of the truth. Before the world tells her she's too much, she plants her feet and says, I was fearfully and wonderfully made, and I will not apologize for it. Now listen to me, waking up with purpose doesn't mean you wake up with a 27-step routine and a green smoothie. That's not what I'm talking about. You could wake up in a tiny apartment with kids screaming in the next room, or in a season of grief, or in a place where your dreams feel like they've been buried under the weight of life, and still wake up with purpose. Because purpose isn't about ease, it's about posture. It's about saying, Lord, this is your day, not mine. Use it, use me. It's about asking, how can I love well today? How can I grow? What would you have me say yes to? And more importantly, what do I need to say no to? It's about being present in your life, not perfect, present, and understanding that what you do with that first hour speaks volumes about what you believe you're worth. Do you hear me? The woman who refuses to settle knows she can't afford to wake up in a fog of distraction. She doesn't give her first and best to the noise. She gives it to truth. She sits in the silence, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. She needs to remember. She needs to remember who she is and who she is not. She needs to silence the lies before they even have a chance to speak. And let me tell you, lies will speak loudly if you let them. Lies don't wait. They will greet you at the door of your morning. That's why she meets them with truth. And here's the thing. She doesn't always feel strong. She doesn't always feel capable. She doesn't always feel motivated. But she doesn't build her life on feelings. She builds it on foundation. And that foundation is laid every single morning when she chooses to begin with purpose. When she chooses to give her focus, not to the demands of the day, but to the direction of her soul. Some of you are waking up every day already defeated, already discouraged, already depleted, and you don't even know why. It's not because your life is worse than someone else's. It's because you've surrendered your mornings to everything but purpose. You've let pressure sit on the throne. You've let anxiety become your alarm clock. You've let busyness become your identity. But hear me, you are not meant to live under that weight. You were not created to be ruled by a clock or crushed by expectation. You were created to move with conviction, to rise in grace, to start with the kind of clarity that comes from knowing exactly why you're here. And that kind of clarity, that kind of confidence, it doesn't come from your planner. It doesn't come from your productivity. It comes from from standing still long enough in the morning to say, I will not let this day define me. I will define it. When a woman refuses to settle, she no longer treats her mornings like leftovers. She treats them like the altar they are. A place where she lays down her worries, her ambitions, her insecurities, and says, here I am. Shape me, lead me, show me what matters. Because that's what it comes down to. What matters And the woman who refuses to settle has decided that she will no longer chase what the world calls urgent, while neglecting what her soul calls essential. So when she wakes up, she doesn't rise with anxiety, she rises with awareness. She doesn't rush into noise, she leans into stillness. She doesn't let the world dictate her worth, she lets her Creator remind her of it. And if you want to know where her strength comes from, if you want to understand what separates the woman who settles from the woman who rises, look at her morning. I'm talking about what you feed your mind. I'm talking about what you put in your spirit before you step out and face the noise of the world. You see these women, the ones who don't back down, the ones who don't blend in, the ones who don't give in to the pressure to be everything for everyone. They don't wait for peace to find them by accident. They go after it, they create it, they cultivate it in the quiet. They wake up and they understand this one thing: I can't afford to start the day empty. Not when the world is waiting to drain me. Not when life demands decisions, boundaries, compassion, strength. Not when there are children to raise, dreams to pursue, and lies to fight off. So instead of feeding their insecurities, they feed their minds. They don't start the day scrolling through highlight reels. They start with truth, with wisdom, with the kind of words that don't just motivate you for a moment but anchor you for the day. There's a difference between being distracted and being discipled, and the woman who refuses to settle, she chooses discipleship every morning. She sits down, maybe with her journal, maybe with a book, maybe with the scriptures, and she lets truth do its work. She doesn't just read to check a box. She reads to be changed. She reads to be reminded. She reads because she knows that the world is going to try and convince her all day long that she's not enough, and she wants to meet that lie with something stronger. She feeds her spirit. Do you know what I mean? There's a peace that only comes from sitting still, a calm that doesn't come from the absence of chaos, but from the presence of clarity. And that clarity, that comes when you pause, when you breathe, when you lift your eyes above the weight of this world and say, Lord, I need you more than I need to be in control. So many women wake up already losing the battle because they're letting the world tell them what's urgent instead of letting truth tell them what's important. They wake up to comparison. They wake up to noise. They wake up to a million opinions that never asked for permission to enter. And yet, instead of turning inward, they turn outward. They turn to their phones, their tasks, their expectations, and wonder why their spirit is dry but the women I'm talking about, the ones who refuse to settle, they know that what you consume first will shape what you believe all day. They don't let lies be louder than love. They don't let the artificial replace the authentic. They nourish their minds with wisdom, with clarity, with truth. They fill their souls before the world has a chance to empty them. And let me say something here. I'm not talking about perfection. I'm not saying she has a flawless quiet time every morning, sitting on some spotless couch with a cup of herbal tea and Instagram-worthy lighting. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying she carves out a moment, even if it's messy, even if it's 5 minutes in a car before work, even if it's the only silence she gets all day, and she gives that moment to the one who made her. She feeds her soul with intention, because she knows neglect leads to numbness. It's not legalism, it's survival, it's strength, it's strategy. Because here's the truth: if you don't nourish your spirit, the world will malnourish it for you. It'll feed you lies, feed you fear, feed you comparison, feed you pride, feed you the idea that you have to do more, be more, prove more, achieve more, just to matter. And before you know it, you're chasing validation instead of living in freedom. But that woman, the one who refuses to settle, she knows that a full calendar means nothing if her soul is starved. She knows that outer success without inner peace is just noise. So she chooses stillness. She chooses reflection. She chooses nourish. She doesn't just ask what she has to do today. She asks who she wants to be today. And then she feeds that woman. She waters that garden. She plants seeds of truth because she knows what she sows in the morning will grow all day long. And don't forget this, she also feeds her body. She doesn't punish herself into discipline. She cares for herself out of respect. Whether it's a morning walk, a glass of water, a healthy breakfast, she honors the temple, not for vanity, not for attention, but because she understands that her body is the vessel carrying her calling. She doesn't mistreat what God has entrusted her with. She doesn't neglect what she needs and then pretend it's sacrifice. She takes care of her body, not because she's obsessed with herself, but because she's faithful with what she's been given. So many women burn out not because they're weak, but because they're malnourished, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And the women who refuse to settle, they've learned to stop romanticizing exhaustion and start prioritizing restoration. They're not trying to impress anyone.
They're trying to last. They want to love well, serve well, lead well, and they know they can't do that on empty. So when the world says hustle harder, they say no, I'll nourish deeper. When the world says you're falling behind, they say I'm rooted where I need to be. When the world says do more, they ask, who am I becoming in the process? That's the difference. And listen, that choice, that mindset, that habit of feeding your mind, body and spirit before the day feeds on you, that is not small, that is not trivial, that is war, that is wisdom. That is the quiet rebellion of a woman who will not be swayed by every passing storm. She's not perfect, she's not always polished, but she's anchored, and that anchor is set every morning when she chooses to nourish what matters most.
There is a certain kind of woman, one who refuses to settle, who understands that her life is not a reaction, but a mission. She doesn't wander through her days hoping they'll amount to something. She wakes up with a sense of clarity, of purpose. She knows that drifting is dangerous, that living without direction is one of the surest ways to end up in places you were never meant to be. And so she does something that may seem simple on the outside, but is deeply powerful. She sets clear intentions for her day. Now let me be clear, setting intentions is not the same as writing a to-do list. This isn't about scheduling every second or controlling every outcome. This is about living with focus, living with awareness. It's about deciding before the world decides for you who you want to be and how you want to live. The woman who refuses to settle doesn't wait for clarity to come to her in the chaos. She creates it in the quiet, and she does it every morning. She wakes up and she remembers who she is. She reminds herself of what truly matters. She's not led by feelings alone because she knows feelings are real, but they're not always true. Instead, she anchors herself in truth. She says, today I will live on purpose. Today I will not be moved by fear. Today I will walk in peace. I will speak with grace. I will pursue excellence. I will not waste my time, my words, or my energy. These are not empty mantras. These are convictions. This is spiritual strategy because she understands that without intention, life will default to distraction. That's what happens when you live passively. You don't get peace. You get pressure. You don't get purpose. You get pulled in every direction. And this woman, she's not interested in surviving her life. She wants to steward it. So every morning, she doesn't just ask, what do I have to do? She asks, who do I want to be while I do it? And that question, simple as it is, shapes everything. She doesn't just go through the motions, she leads herself. That's what we're talking about here, self-leadership. Because if you don't lead yourself in the morning, someone or something else will lead you. And that leadership, if it's not rooted in truth, will take you places you never intended to go. So this woman, she takes ownership. She doesn't just hope her day will feel meaningful. She declares its meaning before it even begins. You see, there's a battle going on every day, not just around us, but within us. And the woman who refuses to settle, she knows that. She knows that apathy is always crouching at the door, that discouragement is always whispering, that comparison is always waiting to sneak in and rob her joy. So she gets ahead of it. She speaks life before lies can take root. She sets her eyes on what is good, what is noble, what is lasting. And let's be honest, this kind of clarity doesn't happen by accident. It's not automatic. It takes practice. It takes discipline. It takes commitment. But she's not afraid of that because she knows that the fruit of her life depends on the seeds she sows in the morning. And so she plants intention in her thoughts, intention in her speech, intention in her relationships. She doesn't leave her character up to chance. She chooses it daily. This kind of woman doesn't wake up hoping to avoid pain. She wakes up prepared to walk through it with purpose. She doesn't shrink back from resistance. She meets it with resolve. Why? Because she's already decided what matters most. She's already chosen her values. And when you know your values, your decisions become clearer, your boundaries become stronger, your direction becomes steady. There's a steadiness about her. Not because life is easy, but because she's not easily swayed. She has set her intention not just to survive her circumstances, but to rise above them. She doesn't get pulled into every drama, every distraction, every demand for her attention. She doesn't need to prove anything. She doesn't live to be liked. She lives to be faithful. She lives to be whole. She lives to honor the assignment on her life. And that kind of living, it begins with intent. And I want to say this to those who feel like this level of focus is out of reach.
It's not reserved for the super disciplined or the overly organized. It's available to anyone who's willing to pause, to breathe, to ask, what kind of woman do I want to be today? And then to live from that answer. That's all intention is. It's remembering your identity and living from it instead of for it. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need flawless execution. You just need to be rooted in something deeper than the chaos around you. You need to know why you're doing what you're doing. And when that why is clear, even the hard things become purposeful. Even the mundane things become meaningful. Because intention doesn't always show up in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the quiet decision to forgive before bitterness settles in. Sometimes it's in the choice to speak life when you could have been sarcastic. Sometimes it's in the discipline to sit in stillness instead of numbing out. These are not small. These are the things that shape the soul. These are the things that build a life of substance. And hear me, this doesn't mean she never stumbles. It doesn't mean she always gets it right. But even when she falls forward. Even when she fails, she doesn't forget her foundation. Because every morning she goes back to the source. She starts again. She sets her mind. She sets her tone. She sets her heart. There's a fire in her. Not a fire that burns out of control, but one that is tended carefully, intentionally, every single morning. She's not content to let her life be dictated by circumstances. She doesn't live by accident. She lives by assignment. And that assignment requires her to begin her day with focus, with prayer, with vision. There is a quiet strength found in the simple act of gratitude, especially when it becomes a morning habit. It's easy to overlook how profoundly this practice shapes a woman's entire day, how it molds her spirit and positions her heart to refuse settling for less than what she deserves. The women who refuse to settle are not oblivious to the challenges they face. In fact, they are often intimately acquainted with struggle, hardship, and sacrifice. But what sets them apart is their refusal to start their day with complaints or with a focus on what is missing. Instead, they begin with thankfulness, and that makes all the difference. Gratitude is not just about feeling good or positive thinking. It is a deliberate choice to see beyond circumstances and to recognize the blessings hidden even in the midst of difficulty. This kind of gratitude is transformative because it shifts the center of our focus from what we lack to what we already have. And when a woman starts her day rooted in this perspective, she is immediately equipped to face whatever comes with strength and hope. She is prepared to engage with life, not retreat from it. The women who refuse to settle cultivate this habit not out of duty but out of recognition. They know that a grateful heart is a strong heart. They understand that when they begin their mornings by counting their blessings, their outlook changes, and with it, their entire experience of the day. This practice does not deny reality. It doesn't pretend pain doesn't exist or that hardships will magically disappear. Instead, it acknowledges that even in the hardest seasons, there is still something to be thankful for, a lesson learned, a moment of peace, a breath taken, a promise kept. This morning, gratitude is like a shield. It guards her against the creeping discouragement that so easily sets in when focus is only on problems and pressures. When she wakes and chooses to recognize the good, she fortifies her soul. She reminds herself that she is not defined by her setbacks, but by the grace that sustains her. That grace is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet presence that steadies her when she feels like falling apart, and gratitude helps her to see it. Starting the day with thankfulness also rewires the mind. Neuroscience tells us that focusing on gratitude activates regions of the brain associated with optimism and well-being. But even more than the science, there is a spiritual reality here. When you give thanks, you acknowledge the goodness of the gift. You open yourself to the presence of God in your life in a fresh way, and that presence changes everything. The woman who refuses to settle doesn't wait for perfect circumstances to feel grateful. She doesn't say, "I'll be thankful when things get better." She chooses to give thanks now, in the middle of imperfection, because she knows that gratitude is not the result of circumstances, it is the root of contentment. It's a posture of the heart that says, even in this moment, God is. And this practice is not just personal, it changes how she interacts with the world. When her heart is full of thankfulness, she approaches others with more patience, kindness, and generosity. She is less likely to compare, less likely to envy, less likely to be bitter. Gratitude softens the edges of life and creates space for grace, both for herself and for others. In fact, this habit of morning gratitude becomes a lens through which she views her entire life. Challenges become opportunities to grow. Setbacks become lessons rather than failure. Instead of living in scarcity or fear, she lives in abundance and trust. This perspective doesn't erase the difficulties, but it redefines her relationship to them. And let's not forget how contagious gratitude is. When a woman models this attitude, it inspires those around her. Her family, her friends, her colleagues begin to see life differently too. It's like light passing from one candle to another. The ripple effect of a grateful heart can transform a home, a community, even a generation. So how does she cultivate this habit? It might be as simple as pausing each morning to list 3 things she's thankful for. Something tangible, something relational, something spiritual. Maybe she writes them down in a journal or speaks them aloud in prayer. The form doesn't matter as much as the intentionality. It's the discipline of turning her eyes away from scarcity and toward sufficiency. This daily practice reminds her of the big picture. It connects her present moment to a larger story of grace and purpose. It reaffirms her identity, not in her achievements or possessions, but in the unchanging goodness of God. And that foundation is unshakable. When she starts her day with gratitude, she refuses to settle for a life of dissatisfaction, comparison, or discontent. She refuses to let bitterness take root or cynicism define her. Instead, she chooses joy, she chooses hope, she chooses faith, and in doing so, she aligns herself with a power greater than any challenge she faces. So for every woman who feels overwhelmed, unappreciated, or discouraged, start here. Begin your morning by giving thanks. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are held by grace. Because gratitude is not a denial of reality, but a declaration of trust. And that trust will carry you through every trial, every decision, every moment that tries to convince you to settle for less.